Welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Our guest today is Jacque Istok, Vice President of Data at VMware. Jacque, introduce yourself.
Hey, JD, pleasure to be here. Like you said, my name is Jacque. I lead the data services here at VMware. Interesting way of how I got here. When I was growing up, I had always envisioned myself being an astronaut. And somehow along the way, between my poor eyesight and my lack of ability to follow orders, I quickly switched out of aerospace engineering and into comp sci, and kind of followed the path towards data and wrangling data, honestly, because I was believe it or not, I was a magician with Perl. Perl is kind of my first love of a language. And with Perl, you can do so much magic, specifically with CSV files and at the time, right, CSV files and text files and whatnot, and shape them so that ultimately the users that were using that data could make sense of it.
You know, it's funny you bring up Perl because you say magic and I would immediately say Satan's magic. Perl was...
What you mean is other people's Perl. My Perl is awesome.
Well, I've never known a Perl person not to say that exact thing. Which is why it's known for the world's obfuscation. I have a Perl story back in my early days. This is actually the last time I wrote anything of significance in Perl. I was working for a company. I don't even remember the name of it. I only made it about 2 weeks. And I had to write a script to basically be a mass mailer. But there was some logic in there, right? We wanted to be respectful and we weren't trying to spam and things like that. So I spent days writing this thing out, debugging it, removing every warning, every error. And then I went to actually execute it, and it executed flawlessly and did nothing. and I could never find, I couldn't find it. I couldn't figure out, the script was so big, I could not figure out where I broke it, because it wasn't broken, right? It's like you started your car, I put it in gear, it drove, but I took a left and the car took a right. And I'm not sure how that happened. I moved on to Python after that because I'm actually not that great of a developer, and Python allows me to at least be competent because it breaks if you don't do it right.
You are right. And it makes me have to tell a similar story, although different ending. So I was working as a consultant at a grocery chain, and one of the folks that was working with me, who ultimately became my business partner prior to us joining the Greenplum team, they were trying to sell a product to the company. And they came in, they got it installed, and the thing was going so slowly that they feared the demo that they were doing the next day would be a complete flop. And so I took a look at it, never seen the thing before. It was essentially a web application that would go and present data from our data warehouse. But when I looked at the actual output, it was creating HTML tables among tables, among tables, among tables. And so the problem was the browser at the time was just choking on all of the tables that it was forced to draw. And so I ended up writing a Perl web front end to effectively parse through all those tables and have the browser do less work. And that was all within, they came to me maybe at noon and we were done by midnight. And funny enough, it did work and the demo went flawlessly. And I'm talking what used to be maybe a 60-second per page paint became one of those 1 second per page paints. Demo went flawlessly. Company ended up buying the product. I don't know how successful it was ultimately, but Perl saved the day.
And that is actually, I would argue that is the legend of Perl, right? Is that if you need something quick and dirty, period, the end, Perl is great at it. One of the things that we did with Perl at one point was, do you know what cups is?
I do. Printing.
Okay. Yes, it's all the Unix printing. Uh, if you turn on cups in debug output mode, it'll actually tell you things like, here's where the PDF that we rendered for the print job is being stored for temporary queue and all that stuff.
Sure.
So by what we did was we actually pointed, oh, we're going to geek out here. We pointed the log, the cups log, we pointed to a FIFO.
Yep.
And then we wrote a Perl script to read from the FIFO line by line, and as a specific line that we could identify would tell us where the PDF was, the script would grab that PDF and actually insert it into PostgreSQL as a large object and allow this company to basically go completely paperless.
Wow.
And it was an insurance company at that. So at the time, I mean, this was 15 years ago. This was a big deal for an insurance company back then. In that all they had to do was hit print, and because the way that cups works, the title of the document becomes the file name. So if you title it, MMA liability, blanket, whatever, and you have a customer code in the document, we were able to parse that and immediately attach that large object to the customer. It was just all automated. They still run that today.
That's awesome. And I'll bet you it was one of Perl's superpowers, right? Is regular
absolutely. At the
parsing.
time, any other language would have been ridiculous to do this in. I mean, C would be too hard to debug. Python wasn't built for this type of thing. Ruby was rudimentary. So unless we wanted to go like really bizarre, like, small talk or something, then, Perl was where it was at that point in time.
Yeah.
So you can definitely have success stories with it. There's no doubt. All right. So, hey, where are you based? I mean, obviously VMware is based out of the Valley, right? Silicon Valley.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And has been for like 20 years or so. But it's a great question. I live in the great state of Idaho, right in Boise, about 35 minutes away from the nearest ski slopes. I got here about 20 years ago, raised and grew up in Chicago. It is very different from Chicago, but I can't think of a better place to go. And if you look at all of the Forbes reports for the last, 10 or 15 years, Boise is probably one of the top 5 cities in the country to move to. And that's been super evident during this pandemic, because everybody realized now that we can work from home and actually live in a city that is, let's say, a nice city, without disparaging any other cities.
Well, you may not disparage another city, but I would be more than happy to, because Boise is a heck of a lot better than San Francisco. It's interesting you bring up Boise. I mean, as you know, we have that schoolie that we run around in, and we always stop in Boise on the way home, because just outside of Boise, about 15 miles, is one of the most famous truck stops in the nation. And I always forget the name of it here. It's called
Stinker?
No, it's down south a bit off of 84. I can't remember. Boise Stage Stop.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, and we stop there, and we'll sleep there, right? Because if we sleep there, if I really want to, I can get us home the next day from that location. But yeah, no, we love Idaho. It is a great state. I love that whole corner of the, it's not really a corner, but that little center of the world where you got Idaho, you've got Montana, you got Wyoming, you've got Eastern Washington, you even have a little bit of scary Oregon. And it's a beautiful area. The concern that I would have, though, is now it's becoming, expensive. I mean, just 2 years ago, Idaho was very reasonable. You could move in for, you didn't have to be a tech salary to actually enjoy living in Idaho. And now it seems to be getting pretty gnarly.
It is. And I hope none of the Boise natives listen to this, to be honest. No offense to you, because they're not very happy with all of the out-of-staters coming in and really raising the prices of everything, literally 17, 18, 20%, higher year over year over year. It's absolutely crazy. I never would have dreamed it.
Well, let's be clear. It's not out of staters. It's Californians. I mean, it is. I mean, everybody likes to hate on California. And I mean, there's a lot of good things about California. But there's also, there's some things that aren't so great. And what you get is Californians get tired of their state. So they move to another state and try to make it California, which I never really understood that mentality. They do it up here too, where, I'm located in Washington State. And we're seeing the same thing. California, especially the Valley and the Bay, got very, very expensive, so they started moving toward Bellevue, Renton, Seattle, and now you have what we call the Silicon Forest. Amazon is there. And you're right, with the pandemic, what's happened is I'm actually even farther north. I'm about 20 minutes from Canada, and we're the last major or last town of any significance before you get to the border, and we have an international airport. And it's small, but it's there. And what we're seeing is especially a lot of people are escaping Seattle to get the old Seattle vibe back, but they're coming they're coming here. So prices are shooting through the roof. And it's actually, when we started this podcast, you and I have talked about how this is a conversation and how we'll diverge. Well, here's the divergent. And so I'm kind of curious about your ideas here. I'm worried about the socioeconomic issues that are not being addressed by the influx of highly paid white collar tech workers into these small or almost bedroom communities, right? Boise's obviously a metro, but it really kind of was a bedroom community until about 2 years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And I worry, I see it here in my town, where we're also a university town, where once upon a time, when I moved, here's a perfect example. I moved here just about 8 years ago. And 8 years ago, there were 3 row houses for sale, and they were rentals for the students. And they were for sale for $110,000 a piece. This was 8 years ago.
Yep.
Those same houses right now are going for $650,000.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It is crazy. And the problem is the industry here doesn't really exist because we were a bedroom community. I mean, we have the port, we got a lot of fish. We have a couple of tech companies, but none of them are particularly big. So the majority of the industry is service. So you're talking about bars because it's a university town. You're talking about little hippie coffee shops, artsy stuff. And that's all wonderful because it makes life for me very enjoyable. But people in their 20s trying to get by are literally having 4 or 5 roommates. And I'm not saying about you have a roommate and afford an apartment, right? That's you're supposed to do that in your 20s. I'm talking about, the Brady Bunch trying to afford a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment at, $2,200 a month on $15 an hour.
No, you're absolutely correct. I sometimes get the alerts from the Nextdoor app, and that app is actually all over the map a lot of the times. But it's crazy for me to see. I just saw it the other day. Family, 3 or 4 kids, I forget how many. They're basically being forced to move into their camper because the rent that they've had for, I want to say, like the last 5 years has reached a spot because the homeowner is just trying to keep up with all the rents in the area. It's reached a spot where they can't afford the rent to live, let alone food. And so I'm with you. I don't know how to adequately solve that, honestly, because with the pandemic, the amount of white collar salary and compensation has skyrocketed, while it feels like even those same people who are getting more money are reticent to pay more for things like the bars and whatnot. And so we're in this weird spot where certain folks are accelerating their ability to live while other folks are just staying flat. And that is not going to work, over even the medium term, let alone the long term.
No, absolutely. And you touched on something that I want to address, and then we'll get back to what we're really here for. You said that, the owner of the property, the person that was actually, the rental owner. And this is an important distinction, because a lot of people like to blame, the owner of the home or whatever that's renting it out for these skyrocketing rents. Okay.
Mhm.
And I think that's really unfair, mainly because the majority of people who rent out houses, they're doing that, for example, as retirement income. They're doing it as an investment to offset, their own lifestyle that didn't provide for a level that they, want to retire with, those types of things.
For
But
sure.
there's an important um, issue around that people never, especially renters, because they don't own. Sometimes it's kind of like when you have an employee that complains about an employer for not doing XYZ without the employee realizing all the taxes, all the insurance, and all this stuff that the employers have to pay for.
Yep.
If you own a property, and let's say, I'm in Bellingham, you're in Boise, both have experienced accelerated growth in property values. Using my example, the home I'm in, I actually just bought about 2 years ago. In 2 years, my property has almost doubled in value. It's very close to double in value because of everything that's going on. Now, if I decide to retire, and unless I sell this house, I don't actually own this house, even if I pay it off. I don't own this house because I have to pay property taxes. And if I have to pay property taxes, I don't own it, because if I don't pay those property taxes, they take my home.
Yep.
They being the government. And that's something that people need to be very clear of. People don't own anything if it can be taken away from you once you have the piece of paper that says that you own it. But more importantly, for someone who's renting out something, if over a period of 10 years, your property taxes double, all of a sudden, not only are you paying, say, $500, $600 a month for property taxes, and people, like if you're in California or the East Coast, people are like, what are you talking about? I pay $1,200 a month in property taxes, right? But
Yep.
I mean, if you're paying $500, $600 a month in property taxes, that's, 6,000, 7,000 a year in property taxes. And then that doubles over 10 years. The problem is that a lot of people that are renting, their wages aren't increasing at the same amount. And then you end up in the scenario that you're talking about, where a family now has to move into its camper, not because the person that owns the home is renting is trying to necessarily be difficult. They just can't afford to not raise the rent.
Sure. And you're not even touching on, if I'm retired, well, you said retirement. If I'm retired and I'm living on a fixed income, if all of a sudden the property tax for the home that I quote unquote own doubles, what does that do to my fixed income? So I mean, it's a mess all the way around.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I am a staunch supporter that, property taxes especially are punitive, and they're punitive against fixed income and lower income folks, because you get a situation where, well, in your situation 3 years ago, maybe a family making $60,000 a year could afford to buy a home in Boise, but now they can't. And within 5, 10 years, they won't be able to afford the home anyway, because the property taxes are going to go up so much. They'll have no choice to sell, which is a great benefit to them, because they'll receive the benefit of the sale, but they're not going to be able to afford to live anywhere near their community, their family, the connections and everything that they built over that time frame. It's a challenge. I don't have the answer either, but it's definitely a challenge.
Agreed.
Okay, so let's, what's something, well, I think we've already covered part of this. What is something you're passionate about that has like nothing to do with work?
Well, I'll go completely a left turn tangent here, since we did talk about a lot of different things. This is somewhat recent, and I'll say that it's probably coincided with my midlife crisis. But over the last 2 years, I have been obsessed with intermittent fasting and exercise, so much so that I've had this Withings scale that you step on and it saves and tracks your weight over time. I've had one since about 2010. So I've got literally 11 years of history here. And I just did a similar, writing a blog post about my journey where I bought the scale specifically so I could lose a little bit of weight. And when you look at the graph from the app, you'll see that in that first year and a half, I actually did lose probably 5 or 10 pounds. But then over the course of the next decade, you watch it steadily creep up a couple of pounds year after year after year. So much so that right at the start of the COVID pandemic, I got back, ironically, from China in January, but right before it started. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I could not believe who was staring back at me. I didn't even notice. I had reached a weight that was, I want to say, about 235 pounds for a 6-foot frame. It was just unreal to me. So I started intermittent fasting. I started with 13 hours, that grew to 14, then 15, then at my height, it was 22 hours a day. And funny enough, over the course of a year, when you intermittent fast, and in theory, I was eating the same amount of calories just in that short window, but I've dropped now to 175 pounds. I've maintained it over the last, 14 months or so. My exercise has gone up to, let's say, about 90 to 100 minutes a day, just because I can. And so I'm so hyper focused on it right now. That happens to be my current couple-year passion.
Well, I mean, congratulations for that. There's no doubt that, I think the pandemic did one of two things to all people. You either became one with the couch, that was my bad, or you went your direction. And in fact, I'm 5'11", and I had also gotten, let's say, quite marshmallowy, for lack of a better term. And I still have quite a ways to go. But what I did was I built a school bus into an RV, and I dropped like 25 pounds just doing that.
Nice.
I still have quite a ways to go. My ideal weight for my my bone structure and frame and all that stuff is about 185. I doubt I'll ever get to that again. I'm just targeting to see a 1 as the first number on the scale. I mean, it can be 199.99, but I want to see a 1. It's been some time.
That's what you got to do, though. You got to set those targets. I just wanted to get back to 215. And then I looked at myself and I'm like, boy, there's still stuff to lose there. And then it was 200, and then it was 190, and then it was 180. And I swear to you, the size of inseam that I have right now, I have not had since I was in the 6th grade.
Wow.
I know. It's crazy.
Well, hey, fitness is important. And I think as Americans, we kind of forget that. I think America, we've gotten very fat, very happy. Everybody everybody wants to complain about something. I certainly have a long list that I can complain about. But the reality is that pretty much anything we really complain about can, be summed up as first world problems.
For sure.
And I think it would be good for everyone to kind of, take it all off, stand in front of a mirror, and not only evaluate, maybe I shouldn't have that 6-pack tonight, but also kind of evaluate who they are and whether or not they're actually happy with who they are. I think it would make a lot of things that are going on in this world a little bit better.
Agreed. And the other thing, at least for me, was you not only have to recognize it, but you really got to want it. It doesn't happen unless your desire is there. It's kind of like everything, I guess, but like if you really want something, and it sounds kind of trite, but if you really want something and you set your mind to it, I firmly believe you can actually get it done.
Oh, I agree. It's all about discipline. Right? Yep. Discipline and motivation.
Yep.
But hey, you are kind of a head dude, one of the head dudes at, one of the largest companies in the nation. So maybe we should kind of talk about the parts that you do, like Green Plum. What is Greenplum? What does it do?
So I like to think of myself as just another person, right? So not a head dude or head anything really. I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like you. But to that end, one of the products that intimately familiar with, very passionate about, is VMware Greenplum. I owned a company for many years, and we did a lot of work with data warehousing and BI and analytics. We were partners with the Oracles of the world, the Teradatas, Netezas of the world. And I'll tell you a funny story. I ended up, while we were partners with Netezza, and possibly not everybody knows Netezza, but essentially a Postgres-based, massively parallel appliance that was available to folks in the early 2000s. But from that organization, I was introduced to a competitor organization called Greenplum. And the difference between the two was Netezza was a hardware-based company, and Greenplum was looking to do the same thing, software only. And through our relationships and integrations and stuff we were doing with customers, eventually Greenplum ended up acquiring my company, and I've kind of been shepherding this product for a long time. But back to the funny story, when I met with the founders back in, I want to say 2005, I toured the office, got the spiel, the pitch, looked at the product. The product actually looked very similar to Netezza. I left the office. They really wanted to partner with an organization that could help them implement this for their customers. I ended up calling my business partner, and he asked me how the meeting went. And I was like, oh, the meeting was great, but there is no way this company's ever going to make it. And so we ended up not partnering with them in 2005 and continuing on with Netezza. I met back up with them in 2006, and they ended up partnering with Sun Microsystems at the time. And all of a sudden, the doors were open. And so we got acquired, we started implementing, and it's amazing when I think back to all of the use cases and companies that have bet their organizations on this software. Back then, it was comparatively quite immature. And let's talk about kind of what it does. So one adage, and I actually just told this to a new hire who started with us recently. Think of a database. The story I told her was Postgres, or any relational database, allows you to put data in and take data out. And you ask for certain subsets of the data oftentimes. Select star from foo, right? Foo is my table. Select star from foo, where order ID equals 3. And so the database will go and look at all the data that's stored and return the one record, or the one row in the equivalent of an Excel sheet, based on your filter, order ID equals 3. So that's all nice and easy to understand. Most relational databases are what we call scale up. And that means if you want it to go faster, or if you want to store more data, you end up having to buy essentially a bigger machine. That's the only way you can actually scale up. So what Greenplum did was basically create I'll say magically sharded version of multiple Postgreses, all running in tandem, all with just a portion of your data, so that you can scale out. And by scaling out, when you need to go faster, when you need to store more data, you just add more machines and more databases. And it's all transparent to the end user. The end user queries the Greenplum database. It looks really no different than a Postgres database, and they get the end result. And so the corollary would be, JD, if I handed you a deck of cards and I asked you to find or to count how many jacks are in this deck, you would have to flip through 52 cards, and ultimately you'd come back to me and say, hey, I found 4 jacks or 8 jacks or 10 jacks, depending on the deck, right? But If I were to deal that deck out to you and say your wife, each of you would have 26 cards. And so ostensibly, you would flip through 26 cards and you'd be able to give me the count of how many jacks in half the time than you would with 52 cards, right? Because you're doing half the work. And your wife would do the same thing. Now, let's say I wanted to go even faster, then perhaps I would bring in, one more person and give them a third of the cards. And we would ultimately be able to go faster or possibly store more cards. So that's what Greenplum is, a 50,000 foot level.
Okay, so now obviously I know what Greenplum is, but for our listeners, just verify a couple of things here. One, Greenplum is PostgreSQL based.
It is. It's absolutely.
And my understanding is that you're trying to become, code parity, meaning that although you have features that PostgreSQL.org Postgres doesn't have, you will have all the features that PostgreSQL.org has.
That is correct. So we are the only Postgres-based, I'll say derivative product that has committed to getting to Postgres current. And so every year we look at all of the Postgres commits that have occurred between our base Postgres that powers Greenplum, and we apply those commits to get to and maintain a current version of Postgres, which for most users, it actually doesn't matter. But for architects and DBAs who are looking for the advanced features of PostgreSQL from, say, third-party contributions or enhancements that have been made into the core product itself, they're able to take advantage of it very easily, but in that highly scalable, highly parallel fashion.
Now, but it wasn't always the case, right? Now, I remember Luke Lonergan. I remember Greenplum way back in the day, Postgres, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point, I'm not even sure when it happened. Actually, Greenplum fell off my radar at one point until, a few years ago when we started doing things like Greenplum Summits. There was a point where you actually became a proper fork, right? Kind of like Netezza, right? Where Netezza, yes, it was Postgres based, but it was a fork. I think even Teradata is technically based on Postgres. And then there was a moment, and what was your epiphany moment or your aha moment where Greenplum said, PostgreSQL is really moving very quickly, adding some really great features that we're going to add anyway. So why don't we take all of it and just augment it for Greenplum to do what Greenplum does, which is primarily, and this is the part we didn't touch on, large data, right? You're talking about machine learning, AI against huge data sets.
Petabytes of data. Yes, correct.
Petabytes of data. Do you know when that point was?
I do, as a matter of fact. So when Greenplum got acquired by EMC, we actually made an appliance that competed with Netezza. And then over time, EMC actually spun some of its assets along with VMware out into a company called Pivotal. And Pivotal really embraced open source. And we made the decision, and it was a hard choice. We made the decision to open source Greenplum. But as part of that, what we were really looking to do was figure out how we could move faster. The pace of innovation for us wasn't quite what we wanted it to be. And so if you think about developing a database, databases are hard, right? I mean, Postgres has got 30 plus years of development experience within it. For Greenplum, all of the innovation, all of the R&D work that we'd have to do was bifurcated. First, we'd have to implement common database stuff, right? Inserts, updates, deletes, joins, all the things that make a database a database. And then we'd also have to have resources that would implement the parallelism, the analytics, all the big data capabilities. That takes time, it costs money. And we figured that if we could leverage the community for the base of Greenplum and then divert the R&D resources that were basically copying the same kind of functionality to enable our innovation, we could go faster and faster and further. And so at that point in time, we made the commitment to open source Greenplum, but we're open sourcing the next version of Greenplum, which would be based off of the next version of Postgres. From there, we figured out how to do that merge. And at that point in time, we made the commitment to actually get to current because there was so much innovation going on. And if you look at, just Netezza, for example, to your point, they forked at Postgres 7, and their ability to keep up on the innovation front was hamstrung by the fact that they weren't able to take advantage of innovation happening in the open source. We were somewhat fortunate that when we started off with Postgres 8.2, and then when we open sourced, we actually moved the open source or the Greenplum open source to Postgres 8.3. It took us a good year to figure out the best way to merge. And over time, we were able to squeeze 5 and then 10 and then 15 years of Postgres innovation into that base core of Greenplum. Still open source, still available to anybody to use. If you know Postgres, you know Greenplum. The nuance being that Greenplum requires multiple Postgres running, and that is almost a mind shift for the typical Postgres DBA and system administrator.
Oh no, it's absolutely a mind shift. I mean, as someone who's been using PostgreSQL related products longer than PostgreSQL has existed, it's still, it's something that I can logically say, oh, that makes sense. But then all my years, decades of that will never work kind of kicks in. It's interesting you brought up 8.2 and 8.3 and that you were fortunate that that's when you did it. And I'm going to go down a very brief history lesson here. The reason it's fortunate and important that Greenplum basically waited a decade before they did what they did versus Netezza is that with respect to our community, who I love deeply, PostgreSQL 7 was not something you could run as 24/7, as a data warehouse, as really anything, which is probably one of the reasons why Netezza built an appliance to kind of obfuscate a lot of the limitations of PostgreSQL. Not the least of which is that it was limited to 32-bit for transaction counters, and it was also, and even more importantly, well, actually, 32-bit for transaction counters was actually probably the more limiting factor for a data warehouse. But maintenance, our holy grail of maintenance, the vacuum, was a blocker back then, right? If vacuum was running, you were doing nothing on the database.
You're right.
So why 8.2 and actually 8.3 is even more important. 8.2 is important because we, at that point, had lazy vacuum and auto vacuum and the ability to self-maintain without blocking. And 8.3 is important. And this is just, a little humble pat on my own back. The most significant change in 8.3, in my opinion, was my doing. Now, I didn't write the code. That's not my gift, but I'm the one that found the problem. And this is the problem between 8.2, actually all versions of Postgres before 8.3. Timestamps were stored as float.
Ooh, they were?
Yes.
I didn't even know that. Ooh.
They were, yes. Timestamps were stored as float. And I found this problem because I was working with a client and I would say select star from table and it would return a dozen rows. I would then say select star from table where row equals timestamp, and it wouldn't return that row. And then I would say select star from table, and I would see the row. And I posed this to the hacker community, and I said, I don't understand. And we actually employed a committer at the time, and he explained the problem. He said, it's because they're stored as float. Now, I knew why float was a problem because, as any accountant will tell you, you never store money as float because it's inexact. Float never will not, 1 equals 1 as a float will not always return true is the problem.
And that's a good nuance that I don't know that everyone listening really truly would understand, because it's not, storing 1 as 1 is not how a float works, right? It's actually
Right.
1 dot whatever.
That's right. And so you never know at the precision whether or not it's going to return. So when I posted to the hackers, their immediate response, and this is how far PostgreSQL has come. Okay. Their immediate response was, I don't see the problem. I had to argue that if I say select where a timestamp is this timestamp, it should return the timestamp. Right? That's how far we've come in this community. And as of 8.3, the reason I bring this up, we moved to integer date or timestamp storage. So all timestamps are now stored as integer. Now, to be fair, and one of the reasons the argument came up is that you could compile Postgres. There was a flag option to say use integer date times before 8.3, but it was not the default. So the option was there, but the problem is the moment you enabled that flag, it was that cluster was incompatible at a binary level with all default installs in the world. Right? So it was a really interesting time. And the other thing that 8.3 got rid of was implicit timecasts. So before 8. Not timescasts, data typecasts. Before 8.3, you could say have an integer, and you could say select star from table where column equals quote 1 quote, and it would work. The problem with that is that quote 1 quote means that the number 1 is actually a string, not a number, not an integer.
Absolutely, and it encourages, I'll
Really
say, bad behavior. Exactly. And we ran into this when we were migrating Greenplum 4.x users and customers who, unfortunately, some of them embraced that bad behavior. Maybe embrace is wrong, but leveraged it and went ahead with it. And with these Greenplum clusters that are literally tens, if not hundreds of terabytes, in some cases petabytes, once you have to migrate from a Greenplum 4.x, again, based off of Postgres 8.2, to a Greenplum 5.x at the time, based on Postgres 8.3, they had to go through all of their queries and explicitly cast what the meaning was. And while it was a pain, we were quick to tell them, well, now you're actually explicitly being accurate. Before, the queries may not have been returning the results that you wanted them to, because you weren't adequately asking for it, honestly.
Yeah, no, you're right. And to Tom Lane's credit, he's the one who did a lot of the work on that. I mean, one of the things he said is that, the planner is trying to be smart where it shouldn't, right?
Yes.
And you can get inconsistent behavior. And when you're dealing with data, you don't want inconsistent behavior. So we know it's open source. We know it's based on the best open source database in the world. It's an MPP architecture, meaning that we can scale out. My understanding is that there's been a lot of work over the past 3 years to make it more than a data warehouse, to make it more of a data warehouse as well as federated transactional. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I should say, just enhance what you said. Not only is it MPP, massively parallel, but it is also shared nothing, which means that each Postgres instance that's running as part of the Greenplum cluster only has a subset of your data, which is how we can get that scale, right? Kind of like that card example that we were talking about earlier. And the reason that's important is because you're coordinating between all of these Postgres instances. They're all doing the same work, just on that portion of data. There are other databases out there that can function in a parallel environment, but they have shared data. So that means
Shared
all of the
storage,
instances,
right?
shared storage, totally. Which means if one of the machines in that cluster goes away, nothing bad materializes because all of the other machines in that cluster have all of the data. Greenplum fixes that by making sure that there are multiple copies of Postgres with the same data available in the event of a failure. But the shared nothing piece is actually super important. Now, back to your question about what we're doing, because there's been so many enhancements between 8.2 and 8.3 and 8.3 and 9.4 and 10 and 12 and whatnot, just at our base level, our ability to do concurrent transactions has skyrocketed from Postgres of yesteryear, right? And then the ability to leverage things like foreign data wrappers, to leverage things like our extension framework, which allows us to essentially bifurcate or have different temperature storage layers, right? So in a single table, we can have data that's on an NVMe drive, for example. And then we can have other partitions of data on, say, spinning disk. And then
You're talking about table spaces.
Table spaces essentially within Greenplum, we actually do it a little bit differently, but you can take each of the partitions of a table and assign it to some kind of layer, sometimes through table spaces, but we even have this federated layer where perhaps some of the really old data, let's say you have a table called orders that has all of your orders for the last 10 years. You might only regularly query orders from the last 5 years, and you may really need hyper speed for data in the last year. So we would put the last year in NVMe, before next year's in, say, spinning disk. We'll put the last 5 years out on some S3 compatible storage like Cloudian or MinIO or something, or even S3 itself, or maybe HDFS is your flavor. But to the end user, that query that comes in, regardless of whether it is for year 1 or year 2 through 5 or year 5 to 10, that is completely obfuscated from the end user.
Just not the people deploying it. Which,
fair,
I mean, that's
fair.
the nature of the beast, right? So, I got to ask, right? Because one of the things that you don't hear about Greenplum. Now, I'm not, and that is not to be disparaging at all. It is a communications issue. You and I both know that Greenplum is the bee's knees. And now that the market has kind of woken up that Hadoop was really a Ponzi scheme, but there's another problem out there, right? In that, or not a problem, but there's new blood always coming up, right? And as a culture, as a society, we have a tendency, especially as technical people, to chase shiny things, right? This technology over here has a little bit of a patina, so I want to move on. I mean, you saw that a bit with MongoDB, with JSON, and what they do. They've actually matured quite a bit and developed an exceedingly viable product. But I'm curious about the latest unicorn, the mythical creature, the power of eternal life, if you're in the Harry Potter universe. What is the blood of Snowflake, right? Why is this? When I talk to a client and they're like, well, Postgres is great, and sure, we can handle up to, say, 50 terabytes ish with, proper management and all this. And then I say, well, that's great too, but we've got Greenplum out there that it's backed by VMware. It's been around for 15 years. It's a real product. It's absolutely open source. You're not locking yourself into anything. At worst, one of the great things about Greenplum is, at worst, if you decide you don't like Greenplum, you can push it all back into PostgreSQL, and you don't have to do a bunch of changes to your application. Okay, so. But you can't do that with Snowflake, and everybody's talking about Snowflake now. So what's your answer to Snowflake when it comes to Greenplum?
Well, so I think first we have to tease this apart a little bit. I think that the world has moved on from buying perpetual software and installing it and operating it. What customers and users really want is self-service, operational free, right? So they don't want to your comment earlier about the orders table and the architects having to plan and manage where all the data is stored. Most of the world now does not want to do that. They expect something to do it for them. And Snowflake offers them that. Instead of having to, figure out whether or not they want storage in S3 versus local, they open up a prompt and start using the product. And I think that's an important nuance to understand. And I don't think it's not just for data warehousing and analytics and big data. It's really across the board, which is why you see, since we're talking about S3, it's why you see Amazon RDS so popular.
Right.
Like I don't want to manage Postgres. I want to click a button and start using Postgres, for example. And so that's first and foremost why I think everyone's talking about Snowflake. And then, it gets into a nuance. I've had a customer who migrated from Greenplum over to Snowflake. And at first they loved it, right? Because they were trying to decide, should I buy NVMe drives? Should I buy spinning disks? How much of it should I buy? With Snowflake, they didn't have to buy anything. They just started using it until their users started using it. At that point in time, the inconsistent and costly bills for users actually trying to make sense of the data made them stop and pause. And so this is where I say, like, even outside of the technology itself or where it's deployed to, there is this use case where Snowflake is good. And that use case generally tends to be where you're not using it 24/7 every day, because at that point in time, it becomes too costly. It almost mirrors, when AWS started, everyone was like, oh, I'm going to move to the cloud. I'm going to move to the cloud and save so much money. But when they moved to the cloud, they didn't understand that moving to the cloud and paying for your usage 24/7 forever actually will cost you more money. Now, again, another nuance being, money isn't money to organizations. Money is either CapEx or OpEx. And so there are some cases where it makes sense. But back to my original point, this particular place realized that their ongoing bills were going to be more expensive than buying the hardware and installing Greenplum. And so they came back. A different set of users actually moved to Snowflake, and their whole use case was load data once a day. At the end of the month, analyze the data over the course of like 2 or 3 days, and that's it. For them, Snowflake makes total sense as opposed to buying something that's going to run 24/7. So that's without touching the technology, right?
So that's actually, you brought up a good point. Certainly the cloud and managed databases have their place. Command prompt makes a lot of money off of it. But the part that I think that a lot of people miss that deploy to the cloud, you brought up one point, which is the costs really can be more than if you would have just bought the stuff. But the common thing in our world is that a client will come to us and say, RDS told us we didn't need a DBA, or RDS is telling us we don't need a DBA, so we should move to RDS. And what I have to explain to them, I was like, RDS doesn't, and it's not just Amazon that says this, right? It's every cloud provider that's hosting databases. They say you don't need a DBA, and it's because managers, generally speaking, don't understand DBAs and what they do. And so it's appealing. Oh, I can get rid of my DBA. Well, that's a lie. What RDS gets rid of is the systems engineer, right? You no longer have someone racking drives, looking for security events, optimizing directories, deploying, Amazon's taking care of all that for you. But in the database world, if you definitely need a DBA. And the other part of it is all of these cloud platforms, they are all, a lot of them are really cool. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. It's really nice to hit a button. I've got my port, I connect, I got Postgres, I can do some tests, I can shut it down, I'm done. That's awesome. But that only works to a certain limit, right? There is a ceiling. And it's the whole reason why like Aurora came about, because they started running around limitations with RDS. So they created Aurora. Our Aurora scales farther, but it has some inherent limitations as well as expense as well, right?
Yes. Well,
Um,
not to mention the fact that if you get used to Aurora and you need to deploy to, let's say Azure or back on prem, Aurora is completely closed source, and so now all of a sudden your Postgres isn't Postgres anymore, and your performance and potentially even your queries are different in the other Postgres environments than they were in Aurora. That's
oh,
actually it's orthogonal to the value system of Postgres.
no, I agree 100%. And it's not even, it's not a possibility that your queries will be different. They likely will be, because Aurora implements its own planner optimizations. Right. So, and that isn't to knock Aurora. It's a great product, but
Agreed.
if you're trying to remain free, let's put it that way. If you are trying to maintain your liberty as a company, as a data user, then something like a Greenplum makes a whole lot more sense, because like, to your benefit, you can deploy it out. You can put it on the cloud. Nothing stops it from being on the cloud. And you can scale it not infinitely, but definitely a lot, right?
Sure. Yep.
What's the logical limitation in terms of how many nodes I can have?
So, it's essentially a physics question, right? Because if I've got, uh, there are a couple of levers for any database, right? You want CPU, you want memory, and then you want high I/O. And then for a parallel environment, the other thing that you need is a fast network. And so there is ostensibly no limitation, but same thing with Hadoop, same thing with anything that's parallel, because it's shared nothing. If you're going to do a join or you're going to do any kind of activity that requires data from one of the other instances, you're going to have to move or shuffle that data over. If your network throughput is congested, then all of a sudden you're going to see inconsistencies, right? Because you've got a lot of data moving around and your network can't handle it. So what
Yeah,
I would tell you is that there is no limitation as long as physically you're allocating enough infrastructure in order to meet your use cases.
so agreed, and that's why I asked the question. The So let me, I want to get a couple of little things out for the community itself, for potential users of Greenplum. Now, Greenplum is, in fact, it is open source. It is not shared source or wannabe open source like Mongo. It is open source. That is correct.
That is correct. Completely open source.
But you do have an enterprise version, which is a little bit different, but it's your management tools, right, that aren't open source.
Essentially, it's indemnity and support, first and foremost, right? A lot of our customers are, say, in the financial services industry,
Right.
and by law, they need somebody to back them. And
Right.
then after that, we have a GUI that helps you manage it, to your point. And then we also provide what I'll effectively call easy connectors. And so we've got the ability, for example, in the olden days, you'd see folks do batch loading to get data into not only Greenplum, but any data warehouse, really. Every night we'd load it all up and people would use it the next day.
Right.
With the advent of a lot of these MPP databases, we started doing micro batching. So instead of waiting till the end of the day, we would load every hour or every 15 minutes, so people would get more up-to-date data. Today, people want to stream data in. And so what we provide is a streaming server. It is actually closed source. However, with the open source, there's no magic there. you can leverage all the utilities that are in the open source. We just make it easier. And we do that for connectors to like Spark and other things. But again, completely open source, everything we provide could be created and curated by individuals or organizations.
So, I mean, it's a lot like, well, I mean, something that I always say is that, PostgreSQL has become the Linux of databases.
Yes.
In that, so Greenplum, I would say, is very much, greenplum.org. Greenplum is a MPP distribution of PostgreSQL, providing all the facilities and features thereof. But there is a Greenplum Pro that makes your life a little easier. And the reason I say it like this is because there's an analogy here. For all of our open source diehards, of which I am one. Okay, I've been running Linux as my primary daily driver for 2 decades. Okay, it's all I run. I don't run Windows, nothing. Okay.
It's funny you say that, because kind of a little off topic, but I too am an open source diehard. Funny fact, I am /dot user ID 121. I started running Linux with the Mother's Day Red Hat release, and I'm with you until OS 10 came out, and then I kind of switched. But diehard open source.
So I think it's funny you brought up /dot. I am not quite that new to /dot, but I am only 8,021.
Ooh, not bad.
Thank you. The reason I bring up this idea of, okay, so you have these easy connectors you can stream, and you have the GUI, and some of that's closed source, and so some of our open source diehards are like, well, then I don't want to deal with it. Well, those same open source people, and I'm going to call you out right now, not you, Jacque, but those open source people, they're the ones running into the cloud. So if you're running RDS, yes, technically RDS is just PostgreSQL with a couple of patches for security because of the way they have to isolate the instances, okay? Technically, but you are doing the exact same thing. You are paying someone for your privilege to run software you have a right to. So if you have something like a Greenplum, that's not any different. You can download Greenplum, you can deploy it, you can create all your own custom stuff, including streaming. Streaming is not actually that complicated.
Agreed.
And if you want, at an option, you can say, you know what, I need to make my life a little easier up front. I need the indemnification. I'm a financial company. I'm a healthcare company. I have regulations that need to ensure that I've got a big company behind me backing me. Not to mention, everyone's got to eat.
Well, sure. When you're providing revenue to the commercial product, that is in fact helping the open source product. You are correct. But to your point earlier, wouldn't it be great if you implemented your streaming server in Perl, and just like your story earlier, everything's working or should work, your Perl goes right and you go left, and you can't figure out why it's not working? Wouldn't it be great to not even have to worry about it and just call us and we'll take care of it for you?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's what command prompt does too, right? Just on the vanilla level, on the
of course,
level.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And because, VMware, Greenplum, command prompt, same, we are in the business of allowing other people to run their business. Right?
Absolutely.
That's what it boils down to. All this conversation about licensing, support contracts, the cloud, it's about, do you want to worry about the inner details of X, or do you want to worry about making money so that you can provide for your family and your teams?
Yeah, it's the old adage. Actually, I mean, we used to laugh about it. I think I had said I started at this grocery company. At the end of the day, the grocery company should be focused on providing an end user experience to their customers in the business of selling groceries. They shouldn't be focused on becoming the world's greatest IT shop. So to that end, focus on your business and leave the other things to organizations that is their business.
It's funny you bring that up. I'm going to say this one thing, and I want to move on to the next topic. There's a new fad, and that marketing people have come up with, and some hotshot CEOs and stuff like that, where they say we are not a widget company or a shoe company or whatever, right? We are a software company that sells widgets. And to me, that is so backwards because it's like you bought name brand shoes so people know you buy name brand shoes, right? Instead of actually providing a good shoe, you're trying to reorganize your entire organization to think like a software company, but you don't know anything about software. You know about shoes. So build shoes and let the software people build software. You just need to tell them what you need the software to do so you can sell your shoes. Moving on from that, because I'm sure you and I could go back and forth on all this. I think that there's absolute value to Greenplum itself, and I really wish more people knew about it. I won't say who, but one of the largest international cloud providers in the world will actually sell you subscriptions to Green. They call it Postgres, but when you log in, it's Greenplum. We
They're
won't
not
need
the
to
only
talk.
ones. I don't know if you know that, but
Well, they're the ones that I know. I'm sure there's more than one, but we don't need to say who they are. But let's talk
and
about.
to be honest, just to double click on that for a second, that's okay. I've been working on this project now for well over a decade. I want the whole world to experience the power of Greenplum, whether they're paying me or not. Greenplum is a fantastic technology based off of Postgres, as you said, another fantastic technology. Use it and be merry.
Well, it's the farming model, right? If you allow everyone to use it, eventually someone's going to say, I need X. I want to go to the people that know how to build X. Right? So you're allowing all the crops to be sown, whether or not you're actually farming that particular plot. But the idea is eventually those crops are going to need specialized help, specialized fertilizer, whatever. And VMware is the company that knows how to do that because you built it.
Exactly.
But moving on, as we start to close out, let's talk a little bit about monoliths. What do you think of monoliths? What do you think these are?
Well, it's funny. When we were prepping, I was trying to figure out what is a monolith, because the first thing that comes to mind actually isn't databases, but a monolith application stack, right?
Sure.
Which is something we're helping folks modernize by turning those monoliths into, say, microservices. So when you say monolith, what do you mean?
So for me, obviously the tech stack is an easy one to point at. I think in my mind, monoliths are more cultural because, when you say microservices, you're just repackaging something that's existed since timeshares in the 60s. There's no fascination there. Containers aren't new, right? It's just re-implementation of what everybody, anyone who knows what they're doing has already been doing, right?
Yep.
But now it's hip. So we got to sign a name to it so that people will latch onto it. And, that's fine. Great. Now people are starting to understand things like, isolation and service, separation so that you limit disruption and all these types of things. But I think for me, there is monoliths in terms of the market, in terms of the economy, in terms of closed source. I won't say their name, but for those in the industry, Big Red would be a good example, or a certain software company in the 90s that is no longer like this. They have evolved a great deal, but they were a convicted monopolist. And now there's I would argue that there's 3 or 4 companies out there that are true monoliths that are actually kind of working together to ensure that no more monoliths appear. But this idea of closed source, company, because what people don't realize is that open source is pervasive as it is. By a revenue standard, it's a P, right? It's a P on, under the mattress of the princess kind of thing. It's nothing in comparison to what these monoliths have created. And there's problems with that. I'm not talking about the revenue part, but there's culturally problems with that. What do you think about these closed source giants?
Well, so I when you put it in that way, I can see actually from an enterprise organization some of the appeal, right? If I wanted to work with a single vendor who would provide for me the entire stack, and I'll make it up, right? If I could go to somebody and get hardware and a database and an app server and let's say a GUI and whatnot, in theory, if any of that breaks, I have one place to call, and that place has nowhere else to blame. And you may remember back in the 90s when we were building data warehousing projects, we'd buy hardware from Sun, maybe get a database from Oracle or Informix or something. We'd get spinning disk and storage from somebody else, and when something broke, we'd get everybody on a call, and literally the fingers would be pointing. Well, it's not us. It's a storage layer. It's not us. It's actually the operating system. It's not us. And so the allure of the monolith is, in theory, to streamline that whole thing. The flip side of that is when you buy everything from one place, the integration into anything else becomes suspect, right? Because their whole job really is to land and then expand. And so, if suddenly one aspect of my organization can't connect to this monolith platform that I've deployed, suddenly what am I going to do? Well, I'll probably replace one or the other. If I'm the monolith, I'm in a pretty good spot to say, hey, we can just replace that other stuff that you have with me. And then it continues to blossom. But, you're at the mercy now of a single vendor, if you will. You have no ability to augment what they're doing because you can't see any of the source code, nor can anybody else. And those integrations and those nuances are closed and hidden. I actually think the beauty of open source is that everybody in the world can literally see what's going on. If there's a security bug, it will be found out by some organization, some user, faster than a monolith organization is going to tell you about it, which means you're exposed out of the gate.
So you're absolutely right. And so real quick, as a fun fact, Informix is Postgres based, or is from Postgres. So when you talk about this, and I remember those days too, right? So you call up Sun, and just like you said, they point at one, you point at the other, so on and so forth. But the funny thing about that is the same thing still happens. The only difference is you call one phone number and then they do all that same crap internally. Right? The problem hasn't gone away. It's obfuscated. But now in those days, right, everyone was hosting their own stuff. And then we kind of moved to like co-location, right? And then shared hosting. If anybody's been around as long as Jacque and I have, what we're describing is the cloud as it exists today. Now, wouldn't there be an argument now? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, there's literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of cloud providers, but there's really only 3. Isn't that kind of the same problem? I mean, what I find interesting, and I'm going to point out Amazon just because they're the one that's most successful at advertising themselves. But the problem exists across all the platforms, whether it be Google, whether it be Microsoft. If you are writing to a monolith, Amazon Web Services or Azure, okay? Yes, it may appear that it's easier. Yes, you can push a button. You've got Kafka deployed, although it's under a different name. Yes, you've got a MongoDB clone that's actually called DocumentDB based on PostgreSQL, whatever, okay? But one, once you're in that ecosystem, you're in that ecosystem, right? Just like once you run, I'll just call them out, Oracle. If you're writing to Oracle, you're writing to Oracle. And so you have it's actually, in some ways, from a philosophical perspective, I would say that the cloud is worse than the olden day monoliths, because what the cloud does, it takes all the open source stuff that we all have built, and they rightly reuse it. They do it legally with the licensing. They're absolutely, what they're building is legit. I got no problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is all of a sudden you're locked in again.
Yeah. And you know, they're people, kind of where we started, right? They put their pants on one at a time, just like you and I do. And mistakes can be made. In that latest outage, what they found was, had you been using the core AWS services to you know, talk to the different services, you had a problem. If you weren't using the core services and it was all your own stuff, you had zero problem. And so now all of a sudden you're at the mercy of a completely different organization in order to get your business running up again. That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks.
Well, yes, but it is all about thresholds, right? There's no difference there than, I mean, I remember when the standard operating procedure was, if you were selling T1s, and for those that don't know what that is, it's 1.5 megabit, right? 1.5 megabit. That was broadband back in the day.
That was fast.
That was fast, yeah. So if you were selling those, the goal was a saturation of 400%. So you would have 4 T1s oversold on your T1. And the idea, of course, is just like the cloud. Hopefully, not all 4 need T1 worth of bandwidth at the same time, because obviously then you saturate your T1. So it is, but those T1 buyers are relying on the fact that my T1 isn't going to go down. So that's not any different. It's just the scale is much larger on cloud, especially now that it used to be you could get a T1 from, I mean, especially if you were in a city, right? If you were in like downtown Portland or something, there'd be a dozen different providers to give you a T1.
Yep.
If you want true, marketable, enterprise class, mature cloud, there's only 3 names, which means there really isn't any competition, which means there will be a point where, and I think it's happening now, where prices will stagnate, but profits will go up for those cloud providers. And then you end up in a situation where one person can deploy something bad and bring down Netflix, Verizon, Apple, because they're all in the cloud.
Agreed. And this is where you know, VMware has such a hyper focus on being multi-cloud or being hybrid cloud, right? So our inherent ability, and actually Greenplume's kind of been tip of the spear for this, because we came out with our public marketplace offerings probably about 4 years ago. The ability, if there's a problem, to basically rotate your entire stack to another cloud provider or back on premise exists, and exists very easily. That is something that I feel more and more customers and enterprises are embracing, because not only do they fear what you're talking about, they also recognize that they're consuming and making data, in this case, within multi-clouds today. And so they have to have something that runs across all of them. Otherwise, they're basically doubling their effort in development, in operations, et cetera.
Absolutely. But of course, they could just run Greenplum and Postgres and Linux and not have to double their efforts.
Agreed.
All right. So look, we're running a little long, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, and this has been fantastic, but I do have a question. If there's a couple questions here. Number one, zombie apocalypse. the world has ended. You can bring 3 items to an island and your family, of course. But that's it. That's it. Unless you don't want to bring your family, but you don't need to admit that. We don't want to admit that. But you're going to an island. You got 3 items plus your family. What are the 3 items? There's no zombies on this island. There's no way for zombies to get to this island. It is your utopia until you pass on to what greater afterlife there is.
It's a great question. Likely it would end up being seeds, water purification, and then I'm kind of tossing and turning. You said there were no zombies, but zombies kind of live forever. And so my head gravitated towards a crossbow or some kind of reusable way to either hunt for food or save any zombies that happen to be walking at the bottom of the ocean and stumble upon said island.
Well, to that note, remember that the ocean's actually rather acidic. So I'm not sure that a zombie can walk along for too long before it, disintegrated. For me, it's simple. It's a knife. It's a fire starter. It's a cup. Okay. Because a knife, you can hunt, you can fish, you can create cordage, you can chop wood, you can build shelters. Okay.
Okay.
Fire starter, it's kind of obvious. You can start a fire. Cup, you can then boil your water to purify it.
Fair.
All right. Second question. You and I have been around for a while, at least 4 decades for both of us. What is in your heart the sage advice that you would give to someone who would actually listen?
So it's funny. I have 4 kids, and this is not the audience we're talking to because they don't listen. But what I do tell them all the time is you have to love your job. Don't start with the mindset that I need to make XYZ amount of money, because we do our jobs at a bare minimum 8 hours a day. For most of it's probably closer to 12 or 14. And if I hated my job every day, I would go crazy. And so for the love of God, please follow your passion and know that you're going to be doing something day in and day out. And regardless of how it compensates you, you got to love it.
I agree with you 100%. I'd like to put a small disclaimer in there, in that there are jobs you're going to have that you hate. Okay. There's stepping stones to the one that you love, and don't be afraid to make that leap.
Fair point.
And with that, this has been More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Our guest today was Jacque Istok, Vice President of Data at VMware. Thanks for listening.